One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I have a dream that all men are created equal.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
What's up, Doom Nation, and welcome back. You are listening to the Two Doom Men podcast. As always, it's Skaggs and yours truly, the Captain, and we have another special episode with a special guest here for you guys today. Skaggs, why don't you introduce our new friend to everyone?
Yeah, we are joined tonight by Josh Snyder, and we are going to be talking about WikiLeaks. So kind of one topic episode, interesting guest. Josh reached out to us, talking about the WikiLeaks, how it's kind of, or, how his, I guess you could say your thesis is that it's a Western Psy-Op. Super interesting to me. I'm open to any idea.
Yeah, and I love a good conspiracy.
Exactly right.
So,
yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So that's what we're going to get into. For those of you who might not be aware of what WikiLeaks is, it's, Julian Assange, been around a long time. It's a Wikipedia for whistleblowers, I guess you could say, right? Josh, would that be accurate? I guess they've branded it that over the years, something like that.
Yeah, at the beginning. Yeah, in the first, just in the first year when they first started out. So they started out in December 2006. They actually said they were going to put out a software that anyone could use. They said a number of things in like these articles from 2007. But one of the things that their spokeswoman said, it was just through emails to journalists back then for kind of mainstream publications who were interested in this weird sort of what was going to be a everyone can leak kind of thing. Yeah, and so they were saying they were going to put out a software, and then it could go from there, and everyone could kind of use it for leaks.
So this is like the first time I'm hearing this or this kind of like theory. I'll be honest with you. Now I've heard a lot about WikiLeaks. I feel bad what's happened to Julian Assange. How did you get into this? What like piqued your interest and made you dig into this whole thing in general?
Yeah. The first time I remember being at my mom's house in Boston, probably in 2011, and I had been in kind of like interested in 9/11 truth, starting a few years before that. And so I was visiting back home, and my stepdad said, "What you guys should be really looking at," and he showed me the paper, is WikiLeaks. And it was kind of on the front page of the paper, and it was sort of revealing government conspiracies. And me being kind of where I was coming from with sort of the 9/11 truth crowd of never really trust, mainstream media. I just thought it was weird that it was on, the front pages of the biggest papers in the country. And so I just kind of had a skepticism about it, but I never looked at it. Recently, it's sort of a part of, it's only one element of kind of a larger thing I was looking at recently. And I wanted to see if WikiLeaks was maybe part of the government, like a PSYOP or anything like that. And that's pretty much what led me to it. Just a few months ago, I started.
So was this so give us a little bit of like your background, like if as much as you want to give, But like, is this like the first? You said you were in that crowd of of what you believe happened at 9/11. Is this some of your first conspiracies? Is this something that you do often? That are these topics that really intrigue you, and you've been doing this for several years now?
Yeah. I mean, I guess prior to finding out what I feel is 9/11 truth around 2006, I was sort of more like progressive.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there were some conspiracies I saw, like maybe military involvement in private prisons in the U.S. But nothing as major as sort of 9/11. And once I discovered that, it became JFK, MLK, RFK, and just all sorts of stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
It really is an interesting premise because I feel like, and I have some examples to run by you that I want to get your take on at some point later, that WikiLeaks has been more damaging to the West, at least to like the narratives that the West, the United States government, etc., have had over the years. I have some examples maybe later to talk about regarding the war in Ukraine and Russia right now, one specific example. So now I listened to a lot of your video, and you make some good observations and points, but I don't know, give us like your summary as to why it's almost like it's like Psy-Op inception, right? Like a Psy-Op within a Psy-Op. I look at it as something that's been damaging to the West, but then you're telling me no, it's actually a Western Psy-Op.
Yes.
So it's such an interesting concept, right? Because I'm like, well, how exactly was it damaging to the West then? Summarize.
Can you give me 1 second? I just got to turn off my heater.
Yeah, go. Got your heater on, man. It's like 75 degrees out today.
We have the opposite season. I'm in Argentina.
Okay.
Oh man, that would have been interesting to talk to you too with Javier Milei becoming president and all that.
We could talk about that as well if you want. Yeah, it's been interesting with that here. But your question was, in regards to it, kind of whether it hurts the West or doesn't, yeah. So, well, I mean, the interesting thing to me, as soon as I looked into WikiLeaks' early years, was that they said they were at that point, they said they were Chinese dissidents, anti-CCP Chinese dissidents living outside of China and other Asian dissidents as well. And they said their targets, this was all just on their website, that their main targets were authoritarian governments in Asia, former Soviet bloc, Africa, and the Middle East. And then I sort of came across this clip of Stella Assange recently in London outside of the trials of Julian. And she sort of went on a list of the things that the U.S. government wasn't admitting to during the hearings that Julian had exposed of them. And she sort of listed Guantanamo Bay, the war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq, the civilian deaths in those wars, and some of the torture programs. But I guess, and it also kind of has to do with my worldview, she didn't really mention anything about just the actual wars themselves and that they were wrong in the first place. Just like sort of, it's okay to have these imperialist wars and take over countries as long as we don't kill any civilians in the process, And I don't know if that answers your question. If it didn't, you can.
I get what you're saying. Maybe one of my criticisms of Javier Milei would be that his foreign policy seems to be something like that. He seems to be in line with the empire, the regime, while I love his domestic policy. So like there's certain sometimes tells people could have where like they might be criticizing a certain aspect of a certain thing, but they're missing the bigger picture, where I would probably agree with you, like especially all the wars after 9/11 were insane. How many millions of people died? It didn't make us any safer. Bankrupt, how many soldiers dead, killed, PTSD, all that stuff. That goes hand in hand with the fact that they used white phosphorus in Fallujah or whatever, you know, like any random war crime I could point to over the course of, you know, that time.
Right.
So you know, I get that. Definitely, there could be something to that. Now, I don't want to like shit on Stella Assange either. Like Julian's been in prison for this whole fucking time. He's probably a shell.
How long has he been in prison? But now it's got to be almost 20 years, right? No,
I don't think that long, but
2014, 2015.
okay, so 10 years, yeah.
I think, yeah.
What do you think about that whole aspect of this? That he's, you know, like from what I understand, you know, he was in basically prisoner in the embassy for many years, eventually left, got arrested, been in this weird seclusion in prison for many years, and now apparently he is not even like responsive anymore, or like he's like a shell of himself. That's what people say. What do you think about that? Like
CIA used him and abused him, and now he's just
it's disappointing. It's disappointing that we haven't been able to hear from him for years. Now, I wouldn't put it past the regime to torture someone to death or drive them insane. Like I know Tucker was trying to meet with him or something, but nothing has come of it.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure who is witnessing him in prison. I've heard a few commentators, I would say more kind of anti-imperialist leftist YouTubers, say that the source is Stella Assange, right? And now the way they met in the embassy once Assange was already stuck there, and she was on his team of lawyers, and then they fell in love in that process. So, I mean, she's sort of from the USAID, Amnesty International, human rights crowd as well as Assange.
That's interesting. Cap, you'll remember this. Back in December, we were at the Libertarian Party of Connecticut's convention, and Feng Zhuo gave a speech. He is from the Human Rights International of China, and he's kind of like Chinese dissident. Right. And we were like, wow, this is going to be really interesting. He was at Tiananmen Square when it happened. We're like, this is like a guy who participated in history. And he's going to speak at our convention. And I can't wait to hear what he has to say. Okay. And it's on our YouTube channel if anybody wants to watch it. He goes on to basically spew 45 minutes of like neocon talking points. Yeah.
Pro-war. Yeah.
And we were all, we were all respectful there. But, I had a couple people whispering in my ear as I'm producing this. In the moment that like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is like neocon propaganda happening here. And it's, I'm also not going to say that there's no such thing as Chinese dissidents that don't like the Chinese regime, right? It's not a good regime, I'm sure. And there are people who are pissed off, but, I can relate to the sentiment of what you're saying is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. And I mean, I never, want to make people think that. I come from less of a libertarian standpoint and more of a pro-developmentalist standpoint. In other words, I just kind of want to see more development throughout the world. And I think that when we talk about economics, for instance, it's very different if we're talking about a developed country or an undeveloped country that wants to develop. And I haven't seen that the neoliberal sort of privatized approach to economics will actually, it can have a good effect sometimes on a country, but for an undeveloped country, it won't develop them to being what we call like a developed country, like a Taiwan or a Germany or an Israel, something like that. Yeah. And so I find that, leaders, I guess not neoliberals, but more libertarian leaning activists in these undeveloped countries or in a country like China, right? Where they're kind of an enemy of the US government. Exactly. There'll be a mixed bag for libertarians in the US, just like you said. Sort of, they have the libertarian agenda but libertarian values that you value as well. But then they'll also just kind of jump on board with US sort of imperialist policy too. I don't know if that's what you were kind of saying.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could. That's kind of almost like a side topic. I don't want to go too far down. I find that interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's almost as if, well, yeah, I believe in freedom and liberty, but I don't have that in my home country, so I kind of want to use the military alliance of the West to do that, or I'm in lobbying for that. Now, that's not what American, or at least right now, or what I am in terms of libertarian belief in. I feel like we should leave people alone and be the beacon on the hill of liberty and freedom, and set the example. And then if people like that, they will emulate that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a much better approach. I mean, you're kind of more in line with maybe a Ron Paul.
Yes,
I imagine.
Yeah. There's a photo right over his shoulder, just off camera. There's a
Ron Paul that way.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm a fan of Ron Paul too. Yeah. I mean, I'm not libertarian, but yeah, during the kind of the early days of 9/11 Truth, we sort of had Ron Paul on the right and Dennis Kucinich on the left, and we both shared certain kind of civil rights values and anti-imperialist values.
Yeah. Dennis Kucinich is a good dude.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Cap, do you have any questions or anything specific you want to get to before we?
If you can give like a short rundown of your findings and your research and stuff, just so the people listening could get an understanding of why you're here and what's going on. And then I have a question of something that I heard that I just needed to clear up, because I'm pretty conspiratorial, and I think in that, and I don't put past the CIA doing anything, right?
Sure.
I can fully see them creating WikiLeaks to have people blow the whistle to them, whether it's foreign or not. But there was something, so after your summary, there was something I want to clear up about China starting its own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't you also, so we, I watched about like an hour and a half of your video. Why don't you also plug your video if people want to watch the whole thing? We're not going to have 5 hours to go on with you about it. So yeah.
Sure. My YouTube channel is called Letting My Thoughts Out. And it'll be I don't have too many videos yet. So it'll be one of the first videos you see, called WikiLeaks is a Western Psy-Op. It's like a 2-hour video. It's not that, it's kind of boring. It's me just going through evidence. And I kind of wanted to just have conversations like this to kind of flesh it out and give it more character. But that video is just more, just presenting the evidence that I had found all in one take.
Okay, cool.
And to summarize, I just kind of want people to just have a little bit more skepticism about Assange and WikiLeaks, whether or not they agree with my thesis that he's an intelligence psyop and WikiLeaks is not a priority for me. But if people come away kind of more skeptical of that organization, that's kind of my goal. So WikiLeaks, they launched in 2007. Like I say, the primary targets were global South countries, so everything but the Western clique of countries. And they said they were Asian and Chinese dissidents. So one interesting thing is that we've never seen any of these Asian faces. So a lot of them in the beginning, 2007 to around 2009, before they did their transformation to white Western staff, were anonymous personnel. So they would appear in articles from maybe like Wired magazine or Time magazine, in interviews with the journalists, but only through emails. So we don't know if these people with Asian names actually exist.
Right, there's no proof.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of weird to me that once they did get into the public eye, all of the Asians, I mean, not even one is around. They all disappeared. Another thing is that in 2007 as well, something called Intellipedia came out in U.S. intelligence community. And that was an actual wiki. So what a wiki means is that you have end user editability like on Wikipedia, or how Wikipedia was in the beginning, so that anyone can edit it. And so Intellipedia is an actual wiki, but just only people in the 16 spy agencies can use it, so that they can pass information and get their information right more easily. So it's pretty interesting that they came out in the exact same year, WikiLeaks and Intellipedia. In terms of the anonymous part, the guy who created the cybersecurity for WikiLeaks is an anonymous guy, and they've never told us who he is. And the way they run it, it didn't end up being a wiki software like they were saying, and they weren't, in the end, even after just a year, the Wikipedia of leaks. What they are is a Dropbox, so that they set up this Dropbox on their site so that anyone can drop in documents, but with the security of knowing, that their identity will remain anonymous. So if they're a whistleblower on the US government or the Chinese government, they won't get in trouble because WikiLeaks security is very good, apparently, is what they're saying. So it's interesting also that the creator of that Dropbox technology is anonymous. So yeah, what else? Was there anything else that you should mention?
So I wanted to confirm something. So it sounded like originally WikiLeaks started for Chinese dissidents, Asian dissidents, and there was no people from China working there at the time. And then wasn't it something like several years later that like China announced that they were coming out with like their own whistleblower page, and it was so contradictory. It caught me off guard because I was like, no, wait, WikiLeaks started like 6 years before that for the exact same thing, and I think you said they must have forgot or something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it definitely put a smile on my face too when I came across the article. So yeah, they came out in 2007, and they did this about-face transformation, not only with their sort of ethnic and national identity of staff. Assange was always part of it, continually, but other than that, but also with their tactic. So in 2010, they started going after leaks surrounding the Afghan war and the Iraq war and the U.S. intelligence community and things like that. And so in 2010, from the South China Morning Post, which sort of used to be more independent out of Hong Kong, I think, and then now has sort of a little more censorship from the CCP.
That's
they
probably
came out
changed
with
with the years, right? As Hong Kong has been slowly kind of absorbed by China. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, are you guys seeing like the black?
Yeah, we are. It's hysterical.
Oh, God damn.
Yeah. We're gonna have to change your.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to switch to the background or something. I don't know. This green.
Oh, you got a green? I didn't even know it was a green screen.
Green screen. No, just giant Taylor Swift and our logo floating up. I got a penthouse suite that overlooks Gotham. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, we just started using StreamYard, and it doesn't like Chris's
at all
screen for some reason, or it's making turning him into a green screen, which is hysterical.
Can you just use the StreamYard like?
I never tried.
That's what I've been telling him. He's a stubborn bastard, though, and he doesn't listen.
I like the setup that we have. This is all. Look, we got her, and we got the bat signal up for the two man.
Yeah. I like it. I wouldn't have second guessed it as not your real background. Yeah. So this article in the South China Morning Post appeared, where this group of Chinese dissidents from within China were inspired by WikiLeaks and what they were putting out.
They already did this.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's like the Chinese dissidents that started WikiLeaks forgot that they started WikiLeaks. And so they came out with something that they wanted to call government leaks. And I don't know if it ever got off the ground. I mean, being in a Marxist-Leninist country, I mean, they probably didn't.
Right.
but they call it government leaks, and they were all anonymous too, right? Because they didn't want to be caught, or they were just the CCP. Who knows?
Mhm.
But they were just saying, yeah, we're really inspired by WikiLeaks. The lead guy's name, at least through his emails to reporters, was Deep Throat. They said they were also inspired by Watergate.
Watergate. That's ironic. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Nothing
they
shady
said they.
there.
Sorry, what?
Nothing shady there. Yeah.
Right. But they said they were inspired. Oh no, I'm sorry. They said they tried to contact WikiLeaks through the 3 emails, and that it wasn't just that WikiLeaks didn't respond; they all just returned to sender.
So like nothing even existed.
Yeah. So apparently, at least at that very moment in time, there was no way to get in touch with WikiLeaks through any of their contacts. Yeah.
This is how I could see that this is, a sensible CIA shell operation. Another thing that interests me, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, the $5 million. WikiLeaks demanded $5 million or something, or wanted to raise $5 million, and then they would release 1 million articles or something.
It is kind of like that. I mean, I didn't even think
Were they
about
holding it like ransom? Like that's the way I like. That's what I wanted.
Extortion, you mean, perhaps?
Like now that you're saying that, it's not that far off from that. It's more they were presenting it as a fundraiser. They were saying
buy
that
these millions of files.
I guess so. It's really weird that they did that. They said they had 1 million documents ready to leak. They maybe gave a hint about something about some government official in Somalia, but they hadn't released anything yet. People have to understand it's like pre-Assange, so no one knew who Julian Assange was, except he had been caught for hacking in Australia in the 90s, right? And so, they went on a $5 million fundraiser from January to July 2007. I don't know. They never really said if they got the 5 million. But yeah, they weren't really going to release anything until they finished the fundraiser. So I don't know if it was some extortion thing.
This is why, this is the conspiracist in me just is reading into stuff like this where, I could see how, the CIA is not beneath fucking scamming people out of $5 million. They do it all the time. What do you think they do to foreign governments? They do way worse than, $5 million of embezzlement.
So they've done
extortion.
South America for many years, destabilization and Fast and Furious and all these things, etc. Now Trump's talking about sending special ops to whack the cartel bosses and all shit today.
Right.
Never ends.
Yeah, exactly. My take on the 5 million is, so the first articles in 2007 that came out about WikiLeaks, I mean, they weren't like on the front pages. There was probably someone put out a press release from WikiLeaks, and then they responded. But oh man, I lost my track of thought.
I was gonna bring up this point.
Yeah.
Is this when I remember you talked about how they went to the White House before they published this?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I was, when you were covering that aspect, I know you were saying that right before they went and published a lot of this stuff, that they went to the White House to kind of check with before, but and I know you kind of commented on this a little bit later, but I don't know. I saw that more so as Chris and I do podcasting. Let's say we uncover some big scoop, right? And it, it exposes something Joe Biden did. And we then reach out for comment right before we release the article, like, hey, we found out, buddy. Anything you want to say? Anything you want to add to the end of the article here before we publish it? I kind of felt like that's what they were doing, in a sense, trying to reach out for a comment, and then they would include that in the publication later on, because I think they did publish a story like within the next day.
Yeah, that is what they were doing. Well, they were doing a couple different things. I mean, they were also teaming up with The Guardian, Der Spiegel, and the New York Times to actually figure out what they were going to publish and what names to retract, so that no intelligence agents or anything in Iraq would get in trouble.
Agent could get killed or something like that.
But let's go with sort of just like they were running it by for comment from Obama or whatever. That is what they were doing. But I guess my point of it was that maybe I was speaking more to anti-imperialist leftists. Like, for instance, do you ever watch Jimmy Dore?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and every episode he's saying that the mainstream press are stenographers for the White House or for the State Department, right? So if they're actually, I think people kind of have to choose here. If they're actually telling the mainstream press what to print and what not to print, then if these leaks that embarrass them, and then they later on want to go and press charges on Assange and find him and everything like that, are run by them before printed, then why would they let them be run in the press?
It's an interesting concept, which I understand and I get it, right?
You're basically tipping off extremely powerful people before you're about to try and wreck them.
And even just the concept of that they're stenographers for the regime, as I probably would call it. I agree with that concept. I do think, though, that not everything is like a monolith. I might even call it a monolith sometimes. But, like The Guardian, Glenn Greenwald was instrumental in Ed Snowden, exposing the NSA. And then, and then nowadays, The Guardian, when the Osama bin Laden fatwa started going viral on TikTok and people were posting it from The Guardian took down the article, even though it's been up there for 20 years. So I don't think things happen in a vacuum either. People and organizations change over time. We're talking about now, I think, over 10 years ago, right? We're talking almost like 15 years ago. I think things have changed tremendously since then. I'm not saying there wasn't propaganda and there wasn't stenographers and things like that 15 years ago. I think Donald Trump himself,
there wasn't podcasts and social media.
I also think Donald Trump broke many organizations' brains and put them more so in the tank for the regime now than they ever have been before. And I have a million criticisms of him as well. But I'm just trying to say, I feel like back then things were a bit different than they are today. So I'm not trying to judge the corporate press the same way I would today as I would 15 years ago. They were slightly better.
You mean you feel like the corporate press is more controlled by the oligarchy today than 15 years ago?
Yes, I feel like it's more so a monolith now than it was 15 years ago. I'm not saying there wasn't influence.
My only pushback is we've only woken up to it in the past 8 years. I would say they've always.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say the mainstream media, not always, but has, the government's always had their hand in what the media says throughout the years, easily up from Vietnam on. I think we're just waking up to it more. I think we have more access to do research and to look into this. We're always saying that social media is a huge double-edged sword. It's a great way for the government to track us and keep updated tabs on us, but it's a great way for us to spread word of something going on. It works both ways, and that to them it's got to be a little bit terrifying.
I also think that I've always said on this show, I know Chris will say it's just one big conspiracy. Which I kind of agree with, but then I feel like there's different competing groups of bad guys, to put it simple, right? And
fair.
In one instance, perhaps a corporate press outlet might want to work with one group of bad guys, or maybe they don't even see them as a group of bad guys, right? Or the group of bad guys is giving information to get at the other group of bad guys. But that doesn't mean that the thing itself isn't true or have any merit at the same time. Right. Now, going back to what we were talking about before with Stella Assange, right? I don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, or kind of the way that she does, perhaps, So there could be some aspect to that. I see it. I'm not trying to be every single article the corporate press has ever published is completely fake.
Right.
That would be a lot. I
That'd be
think it's too
very
much
hard,
for
yeah.
statistical percentage. It's not the case.
Yeah,
That's kind of the lens I'm looking at this through.
Right. I mean, I'm taking information from corporate press articles from 2007, 2009, right, at face value, right?
Right.
So I don't think that either. My issue is when it's just on every front page or nowadays, you know, in every primetime, you know, news anchor's mouth, like Wikipedia's and even like Snowden, then I get skeptical about it.
Yeah. That's an interesting
Snowden
one.
is,
You still see shit like that happen nowadays, like on Twitter, where
Mhm.
everyone will start like referencing some specific talking point or thing around a certain time, and those people are not really obviously related or connected either through business or whatever it is they do. And I look at that, I'm like, what? How? You know, why do all these people start talking about this one specific thing all at the same time? Can I actually make a point right now that that's happening with the COVID lab leak and a couple of things around COVID? Seems like some people who used to be super in the bag for the COVID regime were all now
Playing
oddly
dumb now.
all talking about being, you know, kind of the opposite at the same time. I don't know. I don't know if that's
Like people who
That's
are
because they think we're dumb and we forgot.
so you're talking about like people who are kind of in the mainstream are
Yes.
now.
I could
Saying
give an
that
example. I could give an example. The Cuomo brothers,
Okay.
within the same 3 days, both spoke kind of critically about COVID.
Yeah.
Come on, you know what I mean? Like they didn't talk about that behind the scenes. Nobody gave them something to, you know, some reasoning behind that.
They got the email. They got the email in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Josh,
too
do
much
you
for me to
know-
believe that it's a coincidence.
Do you know what Project Mockingbird is?
I've heard of it. I can't remember. Can you remind me?
Okay, so I mean, we can't even play a clip of it because it'll get taken down. But you could find them, you know, sometimes on TikTok and Instagram where there'll be like a mass shooter, and the headline will be like, "White MAGA supporter shoots up church and how it's going to destroy democracy," and then you pan out, and like 90 different news anchors all go on air at the same time and say the exact same line. You go on Twitter, everybody's tweeting the exact same reference and stuff, where it just seems like this big hive mind email went out, and word for word, hundreds, if not thousands of people are repeating it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and Project Mockingbird is, or what is that exactly?
It's a psyop.
CIA,
you're saying
PSYOP,
from like
you
an
know.
intelligence psyop.
Yeah.
Like that's when they put out this propaganda, basically, to all. These.
Whether it's propaganda or whether they want to sway the truth or create a story or add to the narrative or make sure the agenda stays on track. Just this, we call it an email. Just this mass email goes out in the morning, and every news anchor just repeats word for word the same thing. And it's almost eerie. I don't even know if we could play them anymore because we've had several taken down, right, Skeggs?
Yeah.
Okay. I've seen a bit of that through, I can't remember this kid's name who does some editing like that of just, you know, 100 takes of anchors saying the same. Yeah, I can't remember the guy's name.
So,
but I believe it's fairly controlled. You know, especially the editors of, you know, very mainstream papers are likely pretty controlled somehow or other. There are limited hangouts like you're talking about, Skaggs.
Yeah.
And that's what I believe WikiLeaks is.
Okay.
So they'll come in. But one of the things I didn't cover in the video, which I found out later, is that, you know, WikiLeaks was actually responsible for the Arab Spring. And they pretty much initiated the entire civil war in Syria. And so this came just after the Afghan and Iraqi war logs, those leaks about the U.S. government. So I kind of view it as a limited hangout where they're saying, oh, look, we're not with the U.S. government. And then, oh, yeah, so what about these governments in the Middle East that are all corrupt and stuff? Shouldn't we take them out? Yeah. So that's kind of how I view them.
I get it. That's why this piques my interest. I'm not, like, I watched your video skeptical, of course, as I do with anything, but it's interesting. And I also see it as, if it really is like a Wikipedia type thing, it's massive. It could be that it was started with the right intentions and it got co-opted.
Well,
or people
yeah,
inserting
very
noise
easily.
into just like social media. Like we say before, social media is a double-edged sword. There are definitely intelligence operatives creating bot accounts and things like this, inserting noise into the conversation about politics and whatever. And then there's people like me who's just a person who shares his thoughts on Twitter every day, right? It doesn't mean, but we both go to the same place to do it, so it could be some aspect of that going on.
Yes.
As well.
No, yeah, I agree with you. And I try not to look at everything as a conspiracy for instance, like I'm not a libertarian, so I actually feel that like China, Russia, and some places like that are actually sovereign and not sort of in bed with the Western oligarchs as sort of the conspiracy on the right.
Okay, see, so I would agree with you though. There, I do think that they definitely are sovereign.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that too.
Their own interests and motives and things like that. That might even be a good segue into what I wanted to talk about, or one example that I wanted to share. I just find this interesting in general. Plus, the topic that we're talking about. This is the famous "Niet means Niet" cable. I believe it's called, from the CIA director at the time. Or no, I'm sorry. He's a CIA director now, Burns. And he was the ambassador to Russia back in, I think, 2008. Yeah, 2008. And he sends a cable to Condoleezza Rice, who was a Secretary of State, I think, at the time, or some high up position. And they're talking about Russia and Ukraine and the relationship there, and how what NATO was doing was essentially he's communicating to Condoleezza Rice what he's learned from talking with the Russians. I want to read it a little bit just for people watching the podcast, just so you know this as well, and then I could get into a little bit of how I kind of feel like this is damaging towards the West, as you want to call it. So I'll read a couple parts of it. So this is classified by Ambassador William J. Burns. Summary: following a muted first reaction to Ukraine's intent to seek NATO membership plan at the Bucharest summit, Foreign Minister Lavrov and other senior officials have reiterated strong opposition, stressing that Russia would view further eastward expansion as a potential military threat. NATO enlargement, particularly to Ukraine, means an emotional and neurologic issue for Russia. But strategic policy considerations also underlie strong opposition to NATO membership for Ukraine and Georgia. In Ukraine, these include fears that the issue could potentially split the country in two, leading to violence or even, some claim, civil war, which would force Russia to decide whether to intervene. Additionally, the GOR and experts continue to claim that Ukrainian NATO membership would have a major impact on Russia's defense industry, Russian-Ukrainian family connections, and bilateral relations generally. In Georgia, the GOR fears continued instability and provocative acts in the separatist regions. End summary. So again, as I'm reading a little bit more of this, I want people to understand this is a memo from William Burns to Condoleezza Rice that has been leaked on WikiLeaks. So I got a couple paragraphs to read. Spare me, but it's interesting. During his annual review of Russia's foreign policy, January 22, 23, Foreign Minister Lavrov stressed that Russia had to view continued eastward expansion of NATO, particularly to Ukraine and Georgia, as a potential military threat. While Russia might believe statements from the West that NATO was not directed against Russia, when one looked at recent military activities in NATO countries, establishment of U.S. forward operating locations, etc., they had to be evaluated not by stated intentions, but by potential. Lavrov stressed that maintaining Russia's sphere of influence in the neighborhood was anachronistic, and acknowledged that the U.S. and Europe had legitimate interests in the region. But he argued, while countries were free to make their own decisions about their security and which political and military structures to join, they needed to keep in mind the impact on their neighbors. Lavrov emphasized that Russia was convinced the enlargement was not based on security reasons, but was a legacy of the Cold War. He disputed arguments that NATO was an appropriate mechanism for helping to strengthen democratic governments. He said that Russia understood that NATO was in search of a new mission, but there was a growing tendency for new members to do and say whatever they wanted simply because they were under the NATO umbrella. Example, attempts of some new member countries to rewrite history and glorify fascists. During a press briefing, January 22, in response to questions about Ukraine's request for map, the MFA said a radical new expansion of NATO may bring about a serious political military shift that will inevitably affect the security interests of Russia. The spokesman went on to stress that Russia was bound with Ukraine by bilateral obligations set forth in the 1997 Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Partnership, in which the parties undertook to refrain from participation or support of any actions capable of prejudicing the security of the other side. The spokesman noted that Ukraine's likely integration into NATO would seriously complicate the many-sided Russian-Ukrainian relations and that Russia would have to take appropriate measures. The spokesman added that one has the impression that the present Ukrainian leadership regards a rapprochement with NATO largely as an alternative to good neighborly ties with the Russian Federation. So I don't know if you guys are following so far.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Everything that happened to start the war.
This is in 1990. I'm sorry. This is in 2008, way before anybody knew anything or heard anything about Russia and Ukraine over the last couple of years. Yeah. And if you listen to, I have one more part I want to find here. Sorry, it's a little bit long. But, if you're listening to any of like the mainstream talking points around the war right now, it's Vladimir Putin's an imperialist. This was an unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Blah, blah, blah. He's going into Poland next. And then people like us would be like, well, I don't know. It doesn't sound right? I mean, here they are fucking over 20 years ago stressing like, hey, we don't like the idea of NATO joining Ukraine because it's a security risk to us and interest.
Right.
But things change and now the war is profitable.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Here's the last paragraph I want to read. Ukraine and Georgia's NATO aspirations not only touch a raw nerve in Russia, they engender serious concerns about the consequences for stability in the region. Not only does Russia perceive encirclement and efforts to undermine Russia's influence in the region, but it also fears unpredictable and uncontrolled consequences, which would seriously affect Russian security interests. Experts tell us that Russia is particularly worried that the strong divisions in Ukraine over NATO membership, with much of the ethnic Russian community against membership, could lead to a major split involving violence or at worst civil war. In that eventuality, Russia would have to decide whether to intervene, a decision Russia does not want to have to face. This is in 2008. And again, this is Lavrov and Burns talking, Burns reporting back to Condoleezza Rice what he's learned. And what he's learned is that the Russians don't want us meddling in Ukraine. They don't want NATO expanding. They're concerned that NATO is going to encircle them, right? Like to an existential threat to them, meaning that they'll be surrounded by enemy countries of a military alliance, right? They predicted that it could cause a civil war in Ukraine, which it did. They predicted that they would, have to intervene, and they said that they didn't want to have to intervene. But right now, every talking point about the war does not need to intervene any of this. It's referencing trying to reconstitute the Soviet Union and empire. Poland's next, blah, 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 blah. So I digress.
Is this something you just kind of found searching on WikiLeaks? Or?
No. I've known about this for years.
I gotcha.
And especially with the war happening now, I'm trying to do my research and find out the truth behind it. But anyway, I digress. The whole point about this is like this completely blows up the fucking narrative of the war in Ukraine right now. I don't see this as this is damaging to the West. Now, many people probably don't know about it, right? So I even kind of wanted to read it here. But in this instance, this damages the West. So I don't see how it's, in a sense, beneficial or a psy-op of the West to have something like this kryptonite on the files there for what is, in my opinion, definitely an imperial expansion of the West, right? Trying to enlarge NATO into Ukraine. What are your thoughts kind of on that concept?
Do you know when this was leaked?
2008.
No,
sorry. When it was leaked. Sorry. Maybe it says it at the top. Let's see.
Go ahead.
Let's see. So the memo itself is from February 1st, 2008. Where would it say when WikiLeaks published it?
I'm not sure. But I kind of have looked. I have seen a bit of a mixed bag with, I would say more like what they promote rather than what they leak. Because what they leak is sort of like it's a lot of documents. I mean, millions and millions of documents, right?
Right.
And then people have to like scour through it. The average guy like me would not scour through like 30,000 emails for something, unless I had something particular in mind and I just wanted to use the search feature, right? I tried to look at kind of what they promote through their Twitter account or through Julian Assange or their spokesperson in press conferences. It was a mixed bag. I'll definitely say that. So some of the things that they promote at times do go against my thesis, my narrative.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, for instance, they don't seem to promote their leaks that might hamper the U.S. effort in taking out Assad in Syria until after it's kind of worthless. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I found that, for instance, with Libya. Like
Mm-hmm.
Libya, they published, I don't know if you remember Hillary's 30,000 emails.
Yeah, that was going to be another one of mine.
Hillary was in my repertoire of questions.
Okay. So, well, in terms of what came out of her communications with Sidney Blumenthal,
Mm-hmm.
who was part of her administration, during the actual sort of no-fly zone and West, I guess, NATO attack on Libya and on Gaddafi, there were things that came out from that. So that happened in 2011. And then in 2016, these emails got published. Now, they got published both by WikiLeaks and the Wall Street Journal. And those emails are actually from a FOIA request from a Vice journalist. So it's not an actual like leak from WikiLeaks, but they did publish it with a search engine for the public, right? But what I noticed that they promoted about Libya was more about sort of like the Benghazi terror attack in 2012 after NATO had already taken over, or I mean, NATO didn't take over, right? But in actuality, they did, right? And so they would promote these sorts of things about Libya, but they didn't do anything in a timely manner. Well, they came out in 2014, but they didn't really promote their leaks that showed that NATO should not have been there and that there was no real major support in the Libyan population that could have taken over Gaddafi without NATO.
I see what you mean. Like, whereas in a sense, they didn't use the information they had in sort of a preventative measure to try and stop what was occurring, or pointing out that it was wrong at the time it was occurring. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Or, I mean, in this case, these emails came out in like 2014 through 2016, so they couldn't have stopped it with those leaks. But they didn't promote the ones that showed that, NATO was at fault.
Yeah.
That it was an imperialist war. Yeah. Yeah. But I admit there is a mixed bag with that. Like sometimes he's just totally showing that the West is imperialist. Like I think in this case, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think the net means net memo is making that case that like Russia net means no, right? And the Russians are saying, hey, this is our, as Mearsheimer would say, like this is their brightest of red lines, Ukrainian NATO, acceptance, not just for Putin, but for like Russian culture, which this reference, like Russians in general, their oligarchy there, they had business interests, the Russians with Ukraine, the Russians in Ukraine, they alluded to the fact that this could cause a civil war, which it did for many years. This blows apart the whole narrative. So yes, something like this, which I'm sure there's many other things like this on WikiLeaks, are I use them now to try and make the case of, hey, this proxy war is wrong, which we should stop, right? And look, there are legitimate grievances here. That doesn't mean Vladimir Putin is an angel. I don't think he is, right? Exactly. But that also doesn't mean he's Hitler 2.0 or whatever the fuck they want.
Exactly. Yeah,
that's the way I'm looking at it. Yeah,
and we want to know what our government is doing wrong in the situation as well, right?
Yeah, you can also contrast this to what our government, and this is all the same fucking people. Burns is the director of the CIA right now. The guy who wrote this is the director of the CIA right now in this very moment. He actually met with Lavrov or his counterparts of the the FSB or whatever last year or something. I don't know exactly what to even discuss, but to discuss something. Right?
Do you know what his position was at that point?
At this point, he was ambassador to Russia. So this is why this was him discussing with Lavrov. Lavrov is like the chief diplomat of Russia. Lavrov is still the same guy right now.
Check on something, because there's something called Cablegate that WikiLeaks did in 2011.
Okay.
And so if this is from around 2011, this probably was part of Cablegate.
Because this was a cable from Burns to Condoleezza Rice, so that sounds right. I'm not sure 100%, but it sounds right.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, like if I were to take a look at a leak like that, I'm not saying the specific one, then I'll probably look at when it was leaked and like who I found it out from, or did WikiLeaks promote it and who promoted it and stuff like that to try to assess it a little bit. But yeah, the Cablegate is interesting. It was 150. Sorry, it was reports from embassies in 150 countries, U.S. embassies in 150 countries back to the State Department or to the White House, the U.S. government. And by leaking all these cables, I guess I don't really even know what a cable is, but yeah, memos.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's a message. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, why do they reference it that way? It must be some sort of encrypted method of classified communication between literally ambassadors who are overseas, or even, for example, I think Putin referenced the cable between the CIA and the FSB when he was interviewed by Putin. Like, if the FSB and the CIA are going to talk, which they do. The two intelligence agencies of opposing countries, they send cables to each other. Now, again, I don't even know what that means 100% myself. It's definitely some sort of encrypted method of intelligence agencies to talk with each other.
Yeah, exactly. And so the Cablegate is what ended up causing the Arab Spring. First in Tunisia, they called it the Jasmine Revolution, but they also called it the WikiLeaks Revolution back then. Both people in the West and protesters against the government in Tunisia gave WikiLeaks credit. It sort of initiated with leaks from before, from earlier in the 2000s.
I found the date. Sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead.
I finally found the date. It took me a minute. It says, in addition to this personal email, they're talking about Gates. He wrote a meticulous 12-point official cable to Secretary Rice and Defense Secretary Robert Gates, which only came to light thanks to a WikiLeaks diplomatic cable dump in 2010. So my understanding is that the Niet means Niet, letter here came out in 2010, and it occurred in 2008, then it came out in 2010. Okay. Just thinking in terms of timeline for those who are listening, way before even the Maidan coup, which was 2014, way before anybody had any idea any of this shit was going on with Ukraine, and then way before, obviously, when they claim history began in 2022 when they invaded, right? So we're talking 14 years ago, 12 years ago reference.
Right yeah. No, that's cool. I want to take a look at that later on, that document.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah definitely.
I think I like what you're saying, or I like how you're referring to it. It's kind of like a mixed bag. I think you've definitely changed kind of my perception of WikiLeaks a little bit, whereas I saw a little bit more before as like altruistic. I don't know if it's necessarily that. It's it's like a social media platform, and there's good and there's bad, and intelligence agencies are definitely trying to launder influence.
Another double-edged sword.
Yeah, information, influence, playing games on it. And again, like I said at the beginning, like, doesn't mean there's no truth to that. It's just a matter of, it's a lot of stuff too. Right, it's a matter of actually finding these things that are on there and how they're even pertinent or relevant to anything. That's happening on anything. I was going to make the comparison to like that sort of stuff is happening on YouTube. There's so many videos and so many of them are propaganda. But then I watch videos about like the Roman Empire and history, and like that doesn't have shit to do with fuck. right? But like that's still on YouTube with the other stuff. So there's just a lot of stuff on here.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot on WikiLeaks. And even if we take, WikiLeaks at face value that they're, Assange is just this independent hacker and their independent grassroots organization. What was I going to say? Then even with that, intelligence organizations, government intelligence organizations could just drop documents in the Dropbox for what they want to show.
Right.
And then
set their own narrative and their own agenda.
Yeah. So that is true. Even the Chinese government could do that.
Yeah. Right. Like Russia could have been the ones who dropped this in there. You know what I mean? Because it favors their worldview or their narrative in a way. I'm not saying that they're lying or whatever, right? But things like that, that they did kind of actually even do that when the Maidan coup was occurring, and there was a conversation between when there was Victoria Nuland was discussing who was going to replace Yanukovych in the government. I think it was the Russians who leaked that conversation, and that was was very controversial even at the time, because it's like, hey, you do your covert shit, we do our covert shit. We don't leak each other's internal discussions about these sorts of things. Like even amongst the spy community, that was controversial.
Really?
Yes, it was at the time. And now if you point, you could read articles about it. Like, hey, this was a pretty controversial thing the Russians are doing, where they're just showing you the covert aspect of what the Americans are doing, but then they're portraying themselves as we're innocent, we're not doing anything on our side, and they're not. So.
Wait, I didn't know that it was. I've heard that conversation. That's sort of mixed in with what you're talking about, that telephone conversation. And you're saying that the Russian government leaked that?
Yes,
somehow.
That they posted. So I think the conversation went up on YouTube. That's how it was found, and apparently it was the Russians who put it up on YouTube.
And then
I'm not exactly sure how exactly they came about.
Spies.
Right. It could be the FSB was listening in. I mean, you are talking about this is happening in Ukraine, and they're discussing who's being right. So, again, amongst the intelligence community, this was you're probably not a baseball fan, right? But you don't, when you get thrown out at first, and then you go back to the dugout, you don't walk over the mound. It's a sign of disrespect. Even amongst competitors, there's some sort of thieves' honor. And this was hey, you don't go and post on YouTube our spy shit, because we don't go and do that to your spy shit.
So there was actually you read things where intelligence agencies were getting upset at the FSB.
Yes,
that's pretty weird.
Yeah, is that propaganda in of itself? I don't know. We could get into real fucking inception here, right? Maybe they're just saying that to try and discredit the Russians or the FSB, or I don't know.
Cover their own tracks.
That seems bizarre to me that they would, but there seems to be also, I don't know, I guess I'm going on a tangent here, but there seems to be a lot that Russia and China hold back on saying, maybe less in recent years, since, Russia has been completely sanctioned. Maybe Putin doesn't hold back as much as before, but it is strange to me that they sort of hold back on just showing a lot of the truth to people.
Yeah.
I think that could easily get blocked from us, though. Don't you?
Me?
Yeah.
Blocked from the Western audience?
From the American people, yeah. I just feel like there is stuff that Putin comments on, or there's just a whole side of the story that we no longer get, and the information could be out there, but it's made specifically hard for us to get. It's not readily available.
Yeah, they try to at least filter it away from us.
Yeah, silence it. Yeah, distract us. Whatever.
Tucker interviewing Putin drove people crazy in America, right? Because they were scared, oh no, you can't hear from Vladimir Putin directly, and your
moral ears will bleed
through a guy, through someone that you relate to and is an American, Tucker Carlson. No, you can't do that. They were freaking the fuck out. So there could be something to that. Definitely. I'm not saying it can't be found. Yeah, it can't be. There's a language barrier.
It can be found. It can be found, but yeah.
you're right. It's not reaching a lot of people.
And
Right,
then
so
you got to
thrust
trust the
into
translation. Yep.
Right, like it's not thrust into the spotlight or the, like the general conversation, like Tucker interviewing Vladimir Putin was. Like.
Oh, is that what you mean by like that? It doesn't reach us. You mean like the general American
Yes,
public?
that's how I mean it. I don't know if that's how you mean it, Cap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
I
Yeah,
try to
totally.
compare things.
I thought you meant like conspiracy guys like us.
No, we're down a rabbit hole, bro. We know
Yeah.
everything. Like, you know what I mean?
Okay.
I think sometimes you have to, doing this sort of shit, you have to remember, like, everyone doesn't have time to read through 500,000 WikiLeaks thing and know about the yet means yet memo, right? But in an instance where Vladimir Putin agrees to speak with Tucker Carlson, who's like a mainstream figure in a sense in America, it's going to reach normies or like your
and that's the
coworkers
threat.
at work who don't know
That's
anything.
what scares them. Yeah.
Have heard like, oh my God, did you hear like Tucker Carlson's talking to Vladimir Putin? That's interesting. Maybe I should go and listen to that. And then they might listen to it and be like, holy shit, what is this? I haven't heard of any of this whole time. This might make me question what's even happening over there when I've been told it's
God forbid you might take down your
democracy
Ukraine flag. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's difficult for guys like us to remember what it's like to be a
Yes.
Once you look behind the curtain, there is no going back.
Yeah.
You see it everywhere.
Sometimes you try to, right?
Yeah.
You try to just put on blinders and then,
even when you get fatigued and you're just not paying attention, you'll see some. I mean, every time me and Skaggs watch the Super Bowl, halftime show rolls around and we go, all right, let's see how we're gonna praise Satan this week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Cap, you have any other questions? I want to wrap it up here in a little bit, but I do want to maybe spend a couple minutes to talk about Milei. You're in Argentina. I can't let the chance.
Sure.
I didn't know that. I can't let the chance go back to plug around that. Cap, do you have any other questions?
No, let's hear about Milei.
Or do you want to wrap anything up about WikiLeaks in general before we?
I don't know. Yeah, like I have a couple minutes to mention one other thing about.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I also outside of the video I made, I also found this interesting connection of something called the Global Online Freedom Act from 2006, right? And so remember, WikiLeaks came out in December 2006, and in this act they mention China a lot, right? They want to. U.S. Congress, basically, this is out of the U.S. Congress. We're discussing this. They put out this act to combat censorship in China and authoritarian countries. They created something called the Global Information Freedom Consortium, which is Falun Gong. And Falun Gong says they came out of this act. So they came out, GIF is what they're called, as an acronym. They came out in 2006. And then in 2010, you can find articles that says the U.S. gave GIF $1.5 million. Chinese government was upset about it. Now, this GIF consortium was referenced by this guy, C.J. Hinke. I don't know if you remember seeing him, an advisory board member of WikiLeaks. But he's an American expat in Thailand who has an organization called Freedom Against Censorship Thailand. FACT, so its acronym is FACT, and WikiLeaks both came out in December 2006. And on FACT's website, the first thing you see is that they're part of GIF, the Global Information Freedom Consortium. So they're very linked to this Falun Gong organization that's funded by the US government directly. The significance, you kind of got to understand how important C.J. Hinke is to WikiLeaks. I don't know. Do we have time for this? I might go on.
Yeah, go into it, man. I'm not rushing. This is an interesting topic.
Okay.
Cap.
Okay.
I'm sure, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
So if we look at the original advisory board that they post, and you can still find it on wikileaks.org in their archives, it's all Asian people. except for there's like 3 Western white guys. Now, the only people that are actually who the journalists back then, the newspapers were actually able to track down and who said they had any involvement whatsoever in WikiLeaks in actuality were the 3 Western white guys. And the Asian people said, no, I might have exchanged emails with Assange, but I'm not actually on the advisory board or anything, right? Which is kind of weird. So
like in a sense, are they using them as almost as front men to make it appear that this is organic coming from Asian countries?
That I don't know. It's like, I mean, there could have been Asian dissidents involved because I'm sort of linking it to the Falun Gong organization here. So I don't know why. Yeah, but they may be saying like, we're not just, a Western operation. We have all these Asian people involved.
And if you were a Western Psy-Op operation, that's exactly what you would want to do.
You got to give it a face.
Make sure that people, think that it was founded not as that, as like a dissident thing against the West, right? Yeah,
they basically created it, but they made the truth out of it. Yeah, right. They had the story, but then they created the truth.
What do you mean?
They created the truth after the fact. They wanted to say this was started by Asian dissidents, so all they had to do was gather a few people of Asian descent to say, look, this is the team. Some people are from the West, some people are not. They had what they needed to do. They just needed a face to.
Yeah, it doesn't even sound that official either. It sounds like they communicated with probably people who could have even been legitimate whistleblowers or whatever. And then they said like, hey, these guys are on our board. And then you're like, well, no, we just kind of exchanged emails. We're not on a fucking board of any organization or something like that. They use them as, to kind of like launder legitimacy to what they were doing.
Yeah, because at that point they were saying our primary target is Asia, governments in Asia. So they want, Asian Chinese dissidents to be against Chinese government.
Because you have to imagine like the talking point from like the CCP would be, this is a Western intelligence operation against us. Look, it's all white dudes. Why the fuck would, why would there be, white dudes, whistleblowing things on China? It's fake. It's not real. Yeah.
Yes, exactly what you're saying. Yeah, to add legitimacy. Yeah. So now the only of those 3 white Western advisory board members who said they have any involvement at all with, the actual leaks of WikiLeaks, because the other guys said they don't actually do anything on the advisory board, is CJ Hinkey. And so this is the American expat who's lived in Thailand since like 1990 and who started this Freedom Against Censorship Thailand, same exact month that WikiLeaks started up. And this was, so the Falun Gong Information Freedom Organization started in February of that year. And then WikiLeaks, in fact, came out in November, December of that year. And he also posted, CJ Hinkey, an article about, a blog article on his website about how he and Assange are really good friends. And that fact provided WikiLeaks with its first leak.
Really?
Back in 2006. Yeah, about the Thai government. He said fact got the documents from some insider in the Thai government. And so I guess the significance of CJ Hinkey is that he's the only real identifiable human being that says he was actually involved back in the beginning with actually scouring and looking over the leaked documents with Assange. Other than that, there's nobody.
Interesting.
But even him, his, I don't know that much about him, but like his default situation he finds himself in is suspicious. He's an American expat living in Thailand who then is focused on posting bad things about the Thai government. Sounds like, sounds like a CIA.
Sounds like he just continued his job.
Who retired, right? And got to live, gets Thai chicks for the rest of his life or whatever. And he's working the back channels over there, causing mayhem.
It's enough to
don't sue me, CJ Hinkey, right? But it's a suspicious sounding scenario that he lived in. Yeah,
I'd say we should have suspicion about these things. I mean, having lived in third world nations and meeting expats, most of them are against leftist leaders, right? In the countries that they live in. And most of them are very libertarian, against any form of censorship. So I could see some guy like that existing, but the fact that he's involved in the creation of WikiLeaks should make us a little bit suspicious. Yeah,
fair enough. All right, let's shift gears real quick. We might have to have you back on at some point, just because the Javier Milei thing is so interesting.
It's one of his favorite things.
I could bring an Argentine friend if you want.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to do that again in the future. Yeah. But, so are you Argentinian or are you just living there?
No, I'm from Boston. I just live here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
just cheaper country.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So,
smart move.
So I don't know. Give us a general. What's the vibe down there? What was it like when he got?
Yeah, man in the streets.
Yeah, in a sense. Give us your opinion, your take on it.
Sure. I came I guess when he was campaigning, I didn't even know who he was when I came. I found out closer to the election time, and like people were ready for him because you know what the Peronists are.
Sounds familiar. But no.
They're sort of the followers of Juan Perón.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now I know. Yeah.
Formed the country way back in the 50s.
Right.
And he's sort of leftist, more or less, right? And we could just call them leftists. They had power for many years in the last 2 decades, but there's been this constant inflation of the peso versus the dollar. And there was also this guy, Macri, who was on the right back in 2016, who became president. But the inflation kept increasing even with his sort of budget cuts and stuff like that. So they were ready for an alternative, basically. Kind of the same way.
This was a big alternative.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Are you guys fans of Milei?
Cap, you want to go first? No, this is
my I don't. I'm not as up on him as Skaggs is. I try to stay a little bit more domestic in my research. He's very interesting.
Yeah,
I do love the ruthless nature of just cutting and defunding all these like socialist programs. And, I don't know much on his foreign policy. Skaggs knows more. But they had a surplus like within the first 6 months. So like clearly there's like something, there's a method to this madness, and funds were being misappropriated. But what he views on the world stage, I have no comment for.
Yeah.
He appealed. I had no idea who he was, right, until I stumbled across a video of him screaming about leftists, and I thought it was funny. And then I saw videos of him talking about like economics, and Austrian economics, and mentioning guys I've read before and things like that. I'm like, holy shit, who the fuck is this guy? And then I find out that he's an anarcho-capitalist, which I tend to classify myself as well.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in Argentinian politics or history, right? But I saw it as I was someone who kind of came from the socialist left and became a libertarian over the past couple of years. So I see it as sort of an example to see if what's happened to me can actually be put in practice in a country and succeed. That's kind of the way I view Javier Milei.
He is kind of
so right, but then there are things that I don't understand, and the foreign policy aspect of things. He tends to fall almost completely in line with the empire, right? When it comes to Israel or when it comes to the war in Ukraine, he's super pro, Ukraine, super pro Israel.
Yeah.
I can't make heads or tails of that. That's not the way a lot of.
I wonder if you just get into power and you realize like there's nothing I could do about it. You know what I mean? Like
maybe that's something to do with it. Right now, I'm trying to be realistic about it as well. He's not an American libertarian. He's an Argentinian libertarian. He's not Dave Smith, right? He's Javier Milei. So maybe he just looks at things slightly differently than Americans would look at. He's not living here in the empire and looking out of the empire. I've heard someone say maybe that's just you got to play ball in order to survive. You could get regime change in 5 seconds if they want, and they don't really give a fuck what You know, like the empire doesn't really give a fuck what your domestic policy is going to be as long as you toe the line in terms of the empire itself. I saw another American libertarian made a great point. Like, the empire works with fucking terrorists in Syria, right? Why don't you think they would also work with anarcho-capitalists in Argentina? Like, if they're willing to work with one group they don't like, they would also work with another group they don't like. But it's a very interesting scenario. I'm disappointed with his foreign policy platform, but I'm not so much concerned about it because it's also Argentina.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, what does it matter? Yeah.
Like Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So he's interesting. Yeah. I want to see if
he's not helps. Like on the streets at this point. He's lost some popularity, but he sees it as just the beginning of his process. So he thinks it's going to get better. Mm-hmm. And he said that since the beginning, like, we're going to have to go through this awful period until we come out of it and fix this inflation problem. Inflation of peso versus dollar is done. Almost as soon as he got into office, it's like not moved at all, which is crazy to me, because there was I'll just kind of say like a neoliberal, but we might call it libertarian budget cut kind of stuff and privatization back in the 90s. It took them 2 years to get the inflation down to 20% a month, you know, and it was still inflating at 20% a month versus the dollar. Mm-hmm. And this guy Milei comes in and does it in 2 months, and there's no inflation now in terms of the two currencies. But a lot of subsidies got lifted. I guess in Latin America, like, they subsidize the bus, they subsidize gas and oil, they subsidize electricity and transport and all sorts of stuff. And so food prices rose up a lot, and prices of everything rose. Sort of an inflation without the currency inflating.
I understand. The prices inflated.
So start paying it back somehow, right?
Yeah. You mean the loans, or?
Yeah, just the terrible situation the country found itself in for many years. A lot of us American libertarians have been like, like, if we get our chance and enact our policy, like, there's going to be a period of severe pain. Like, you don't rebound. You don't get out of $30 trillion in debt that we're in currently without there being no pain. So, like, we could either go through the pain in a managed way, as a libertarian would want to do, or we could go through it in the form of some sort of horrific collapse that ends up in Mad Max in 50
sort of
years.
Depends how long they make you wait.
Correct. Right.
Well, they're waiting for the Mad Max moment.
So, like, there's pain. No matter what, there's going to be pain. But what sort of pain would you like? Would you like some short-term pain for a couple of years? Or would you like Mad Max in 100 years, when the whole, human society collapses from
fallout,
from fallout or something like that?
Yeah. So that's the way Milei, and I don't know if they even call themselves Mileistas, look at it.
Mileistas, I like that.
So he still has like a good chunk of support. He's probably below 50%. Mm-hmm. But
it's a very difficult, especially in democracy, it's a very difficult thing to run on or convince the population, like, hey, it's going to suck, and you're just going to have to suck it up for a couple of years because later it's going to get better. And then
that's like, modern society, man. They can't take that pain.
Then the flaw with democracy is then someone runs for office. It's like, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to just what we were doing before because it was better. And then that person wins, and the plan never gets seen through, and it kind of just starts a negative feedback loop again. So again, I view it as it's a case study. Is it going to work? Is it going to? And then if it does, I'm knocking on wood. Hopefully it does.
Well, there's some sort of something of May that's coming up in the next weeks that he announced a couple months ago. The leftist paper I read is that he's going to have meetings with these contingents of parliament, not in Buenos Aires, but in another city, essentially to convince them to go through with the rest of his reforms. I don't know if you guys heard his reforms got rejected.
No, I didn't hear this. I didn't hear this part.
Oh, yeah. Like maybe his second month in, he had this huge package of reforms. They discussed it in Parliament for a long time, and then they ended up, because he wanted it either rejection or acceptance without of the whole package.
I see.
And so they rejected it, even though he did have like quite a bit of support in Congress. They rejected it, and so he got kind of pissed off. Said something. He made a list, his hit list, kind of, of people who need to be drained from the swamp, who voted against his.
Right.
Yeah, and so now he's taking this tactic of. He's sort of threatening the provinces with holding back their federal funds if they don't sign on to certain kind of like, they're more like these 10 values. And then he's going to use these 10 principled values of being an Argentinian national patriot in order to try to
like a fucking libertarian to me. It sounds autistic to me, right? Like, here's my libertarian principles, and you guys should all follow them for a certain period of time, and everything will work out better in the end. And if you don't, it's I like it. It makes me believe that he actually is a libertarian more, to be honest with you.
Right. Domestically, he's certainly libertarian. Yeah. Well, no, I shouldn't say that, because as part of his package that he wanted to pass, he included like going to prison for protesting the government. So that's not like, socially, he's not libertarian.
Is that what it is? Protesting the government, or was it? I think I saw that. Right. It's interesting. It's also interesting. Like, I look at it as like, well, like his opposition is obviously going to write things that are maybe not 100% true either, and I don't speak Spanish, so what do I know exactly?
No, that's true, because it's a very protest-heavy country. It's kind of like France. They protest a lot in general.
Yeah.
So if you're like, a politician in Buenos Aires and they're always at the doorstep of the Capitol protesting you, then you can't always get things done.
Right.
Or maybe they're also like going on strike. When I lived in Ecuador, they had extremely effective strikes where they would like shut down highways between the mountain cities and the coastal cities. And so that may happen here as well. So it scares them.
So just to give you a window into my libertarian theory, I don't see how that would even conflict with libertarianism. Like, if he's making it illegal for people to obstruct the highway, I don't see that as not libertarian, because like, you don't
public highway, it's not private property,
regardless of whatever your cause is, right? Like, you don't have a right to imprison someone who might be driving along the highway and block them from, let's say, going to the hospital or going to work or whatever. Like, each person is individually free. Just because the collective thinks their cause is more important doesn't mean they get to literally imprison someone on the road because of their cause in the moment. And so, like, it doesn't mean that like protesting is illegal, but perhaps protesting on the road and blocking
obstruction
traffic is illegal, because like someone could die. Let's be honest, right? If there's an ambulance coming and someone's on like life support, and if they don't get to the hospital in the next 15 minutes, they're going to die. And then there's a protest and the ambulance going to get there, you die. Right?
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, when in Ecuador, I don't know if it works the same here, but there were shortages of, like cooking gas and things like that when strikes like that happen.
Right. There could be negative effects from that.
Yeah. But they definitely were threatening. They wanted to pass this law of, 5 years imprisonment for just protesting even. They were just afraid that there would be too many protests from the left, essentially.
Gotcha.
Of the Flan. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. Interesting, man. I definitely would be interested in having you back on with an Argentinian friend. Maybe we let like a little bit of it play out, because it's hard to. Everybody's like chewing.
Yeah, you got to let this one play out.
Yeah, everybody's chewing at the bit to say what it is, but sometimes you have to. Even Javier Milei saying like, "Hey, give me a chance. Let me try and enact my reforms before we can actually reap any fruit from it." So
if he's saying at the start that it's going to take time, then it's weird not to give it time if you voted for him or if you supported him.
Well, that's what I'm saying about modern society. They can't take 1 second of pain, not 1 second of pain. Yeah. So
I don't know if I could either.
Yeah,
I mean, if I was like an Argentinian,
it's easy to say when you're in a comfortable position.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pro Mad Max in it, so
okay. Yeah.
All right,
but we can do that like down the line. If you want.
We'll set something up definitely. So we'll wrap it up here. Why don't you shout out again where everybody can find you and all the good stuff?
Oh yeah, pretty much just letting my thoughts out. YouTube channel is where I'm at. Yeah. So thanks for having me on, guys. It was fun.
Yes, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it. Skaggs, any final words?
That's it, man. It was really interesting. Definitely an eye opener for me, changing my perspective a little bit, honestly, on WikiLeaks.
Yes, very interesting conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Doom Nation, we will be back next week. Josh, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. Everyone else, adios.
All right. Good night, guys.
Good night.